Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Happy Friday night, and thanks for coming to the Menil collection. My name is David Breslin. I'm the John R. Eckel Jr. Foundation Chief Curator of the Menil Drawing Institute, and with me, and we're thrilled to have him, is Danh Vō. Jan has two pieces in the exhibition that is currently up in our West Temporary space called the Precarious, which looks at collage and kind of a larger expanded thinking around collage. In our collection, Jan's are the only two works that aren't in the collection, but his works feel like they are part of not only that show, but kind of the DNA of what the Menil collection is about. Instead of doing a traditional biographical introduction, I thought I would read a poem. I think it's keeping with a lot of Mrs. de Menil's thinking about poetry over pedagogy. And that relationship is an interesting one, but not for this evening, so I thought I'd start with that. And then here's how we'll do this evening. We're going to run through some of the exhibitions that Jan has done, so many over the last couple of years. Incredible. I'm so happy you're still with us after all that work. And then talk really specifically about the two works in the show and the one work of Jan's in the collection. And then we'd love to open up to questions with you. And then we'll all be out of here by 8 o'clock. So this is a poem by Wisława Szymborska, the Polish poet and Nobel laureate. It's called Children of Our Age. We are children of our age. It's a political age. All day long, all through the night, all affairs, yours, ours, theirs, are political affairs. Whether you like it or not, your genes have a political past, your skin a political cast, your eyes a political slant. Whatever you say reverberates, whatever you don't say speaks for itself. So either way, you're talking politics. Even when you take to the woods, you're taking political steps on political grounds. Apolitical poems are also political, and above us shines a moon no longer purely lunar. To be or not to be, that is the question, and though it troubles the digestion, it's a question, as always, of politics. To acquire a political meaning, you don't even have to be human. Raw material will do, or protein feed, or crude oil, or a conference table whose shape was quarreled over for months. Should we arbitrate life and death at a round table or a square one? Meanwhile, people perished, animals died, houses burned, and the fields ran wild, just as in times immemorial and less political. So, with that, I wanted to start with the show that was the way that many of us, I think, came to know Jan's work, or at least how I came to know your work at the Kunsthalle Basel for Where the Lions Are. This was the main space with these two pieces, and I didn't want to burden Jan with having to talk too much about all these shows, but please, if you want to, whenever you feel like it, you can come in. This is called Tombstone, and it has three elements based on an earlier piece that Jan made, a totem, which was a television, a refrigerator, a washing machine, and a crucifix that were given to Jan's grandmother when she moved to Denmark, or immigrated to Denmark?
Germany.
To Germany. This is wallpaper with flowers that, and flora that missionaries from China and Tibet had found and then placed onto this paper.
Yeah.
This was his beautiful show at Artist Space, Autoerotic Asphyxiation, which was really staggering. When you went in and opened, the elevator opened, you were in what looked like a completely empty space with just these drapes on the walls, which also had these same flowers. And then inside, when you would open them, were these photographs from Joseph Carrier. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I recognized that there was not that many pictures of Joseph Carrier, and like in your slides, so it's a bit difficult to go in depth with them, but it's a person that, I mean, I was, oh, sorry. I was in a residency in LA in 2007, I think, and it was a kind of weird residency, but you had to make artist talk, and this person came up to me afterwards, like at the reception, and introduced himself, and he was, if you notice, my name is spelled with a D, but in Vietnamese it's pronounced like a G, like J, so that's why my parents would call me Yang. And he would come up and, you know, pronounce my name correctly. And of course I was like, there was one of the few white person at least that would do that, so I was intrigued and asked him how come, and he would tell me that he was working for the RAND Corporation, which in the, like, RAND Corporation for, like, he worked for the RAND Corporation and had been in Vietnam back and forth from 62 to 73 or something. So, and I could see that he somehow was, I mean, he's 70 something, but I could see that he was kind of cruising. And, you know, as an artist, I don't think that I mean, I'm not an artist that comes up with these kind of ideas or connections, but I encounter them. And I was very intrigued that, you know, this person in front of me had been in Vietnam during the whole Vietnam War, and at the same time was gay, and I, you know, I wanted to know more about it.
Yeah.
And
so you knew all of this before you knew he had these photographs as well?
No, but this was the first time I met him.
Okay.
So as you can see, these are two examples of images where you can see two military personnel holding hands, but at that time, and you still see it, but rarely today, that men have another intimacy in Vietnam, and that doesn't mean that they're gay. In the Vietnamese government barely acknowledge that homosexuality exists, so it's a hyper masculinity, which you see in different other cultures too. So, going back to the story where I met him first time, I never knew that such things would exist. I thought I wanted like to engage in meeting him because of oral history being told, or, you know, I just wanted to know more about it. And we somehow became friends. I mean, he was living quite close by and told me that I could visit him any day I wanted. And the day after, I would knock at his door. And he has this beautiful small house in Pacific Palisades. But when you enter, you just see like all these ethnological stuff, and then all these, not these kind of photos, but other kind of homoerotic photos. And it happened that he wanted to travel to Vietnam, and I thought, yeah, why not, you know? So we went to Vietnam together. And it was in Vietnam that we would see, you know, two men holding hands, and he would tell me that when he saw this for the first time in 62, he couldn't help photographing. And I was like, Joe, I call him Joe, so what do you mean? Did you go around and take paparazzi photos during the Vietnam War? I was like, yeah, you know, like, yeah, he took a lot of them. I was like, do they still exist? And yeah, they're in the basement somewhere. He's a kind of, you know, he keeps everything. And I told him, okay, so after the Vietnam trip, I would go back to LA and we should clean up his garage. And that was when we found like all these fantastic photographs. And, you know, I always say that I'm an artist that have been very fortunate. A lot of things basically fall on my lap. You know, I didn't really, I mean, of course I took the chances and I took the opportunities, but a lot of things were confronted to me. And I think at the time I was probably 30-something and was open for these kind of things. But if I've met him when I was 20 years old or something, it would have been a different case, you know. So there's there's a lot of coincidences, lucky circumstances that create such a situation. And this was one of them.
Did he see the Artist Space show?
No, I mean, I've traveled with him sometimes when I've presented the photos. Yeah. But, today he's like 85 plus or something. Okay. So, I mean, this is of course 5 years ago, but many times when I ask him to come for an opening, he's like, why don't we go to Vietnam together? So he have another preferences. Yeah. I mean, he's been to some shows, but, at openings, I mean, he wants to spend time with me, and openings are not the right time to spend.
That's true. Me. Yeah. But what does he? And I don't mean for you to have to speak for him, but when he sees these photographs now in this different scenario, or actually made public in a way that he might not ever have thought that they would be, does he have a response to that?
It takes hours to get into these kind of certain works, and this is actually one of them. But I can try to do it a bit short. He was fired in '68 because there was suspicion that he was gay, and at that time the argument would, his security clearance, top security clearance, that was what he had because he worked for the RAND, would be taken away from him because the argument would be that it would be an excuse for anybody to bribe. So in '68 there was some accusation against him, and he was fired from the RAND Corporation. Somehow he won, so they had to negotiate, and he got like another education. It's a complicated story. And he educated himself as an anthropologist, and since he knew Vietnam so well, there was a committee to research Agent Orange, and he, because of his connection and his new position, he was actually rehired to go back and research about Agent Orange, because in the United States you also used Agent Orange, and you started so slowly to discover that it was a very poisonous chemical for human being too, because Agent Orange was meant to burn off wood for the guerrilla warfare. Yeah. And so all this was, like a very dark period in his life. I mean, he never looked back in this. I mean, that was why he had it hidden somewhere, because all the memories he had from Vietnam War was this horrible situation where he was fired and had to rechange his whole life. So he never really understood, or he never, he didn't, I mean, it was a trauma for him. So I think when I came in and was just like, but these, not only in terms of documentation, but also the quality of the photographs were fantastic. I mean, conceptually, I was in a period where I was very much into the idea of photography as, because the photography doesn't describe what it's illustrating, it's actually describing much more the person that's taking them. So it had like a notion within photography that I was very interested in at that time, So it was weird. It really clicked in with a lot of conceptual thinking that I was thinking of at the time. So, I was like, this cannot, it was kind of unbelievable from my side. But it took years for him to really understand it himself, because he had to revisit a traumatic period in his life. Yeah.
This is the show in Kassel, July 4th, 1776. And this is a series of works, We the People, where you reconstructed piece by piece the Statue of Liberty. I know this is a big question, but what coincidence, or what, these things that these encounters that approach you, when did this idea come?
Yeah, now I don't hope that people would think that I'm totally schizophrenic. But, I think I have to explain that I don't really, I'm not an artist or a person that have like a end goal of things. I don't think so far. I'm a bit of more messy, and, a lot of ideas comes up, and some ideas comes to you, and, you take choices in your life. This is actually the first time it was exhibited too, and it represented 1/3 of the project. And it's in Castle, like in Friedrichshainum, which is this gigantic museum. Once a year, when Ryan Wolfs was director at the museum, he would, or once every second year or something, he would dedicate the whole museum to one artist, because it's a really big museum. So usually it would be 3 solo exhibitions at the time. And I hadn't done that many exhibitions, it's relatively, but somehow I was getting known for very sparse spaces, like you saw Artist Space and Kunsthalle Basel, that they were very sparse, but I was never conceptual in that sense, and I was always, okay, I have this kind of amount of work, and then you make it happen,
Yeah.
And he came to me, Ryan Wolfs, the director of Friedrichshainum, and was like, he really liked my sparse exhibitions, and like, it's a character, it's a character of mine that I hate to be put in a box. And I was thinking, maybe I should stuff that museum with something really big. And it sounds stupid, but it's actual reality. I was like, what could be really big?
The Statue of Liberty.
And the Statue of Liberty came up to my mind, And, as an artist, you get like a lot of stupid ideas. And I thought this would be one of them, but it didn't took that long time before, I had to research very little before I found out I had never seen the Statue of Liberty in my life before. Yeah. And I found out that it was 2 millimeters thick, the surface of the Statue of Liberty. And I think these information are super interesting because information, practical, informal information that cracks your idea of things are very precious, I think, because that's how our mind functions. We think this image is one thing, but in reality, it needs very small things to break it down.
Yeah.
And I think with such a strong image like the Statue of Liberty, and you find out that the surface is 2 millimeters or size of 2 penny thick. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that was when I thought, okay, we go for it. But then, of course, because it was the information of the surface that was interesting, the concept was basically to say, okay, we want to reconstruct the surface of this icon.
Yeah.
And that's how it, came about, because if you don't have the steel construction that Eiffel was building in order to uphold it, you have to do it in pieces.
Yeah.
So of course a lot of times the project was referred back to this idea that I deconstructed the Statue of Liberty, and I think that's like really wrong, because I really tried to recreate and rebuild it.
Yeah.
But if you don't rebuild the skeleton, this is how it would turn out.
Yeah.
So it was practical decisions that created the aesthetic of it, which is very important in such a project, I think.
I think one of the really beautiful readings of this piece was the one that the anthropologist McTalzig did, and he really talks about the relic and how the relic is somehow overburdened with history. And I think that we see with your works the idea of the fragment or the part having this kind of power that compels a viewer. And so does this relic, this reading of something that has something that might be overburdened, does that have resonance to you?
Yeah, like I hate to be psychoanalyzing myself, but I was raised very Catholic, and of course these kind of things are probably a part of it, but I think I'm much more practical.
Yeah.
I think it's also an economical question of how much do you need actually in order to express certain things you want to express.
Yeah.
And in many cases you don't need much. And I think it's much more practical, economical choice.
So this is another image from that show. This is the exhibition Voyan at the Kunsthaus Bregenz. And this is where I first saw you doing the pieces with the cardboard. And it's somehow akin to one of the works in the Precarious. And I was wondering how you came to this material, which is in some ways as economic as you can get. And yet you pair it with the gold leaf, which is as uneconomic in some ways as you can get. So I wonder, what was the draw to the material? And why did you choose this kind of amazing Zumthor building to do this work?
Yeah, I mean, now people would really think that I'm schizophrenic, because after my studies, I had a very good friend, Precarious, which is also an artist, and we had the liberty to. We were so good friends. So he chose to move back to Thailand, and I would come and visit him a lot, and I could stay there for 1 month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months, and it was really just. I never really traveled to Southeast Asia that much before this, so it was just like this luxury of being among friends.
Yeah.
And I started to exhibit more and more, and getting kind of busy, so I couldn't do that. And we were probably a drunken evening. We were like thinking of what to do, because I had like to get a production going and doing something here professionally if I were to stay in Bangkok for all this time. And one of the materials in Bangkok that really came up was, you have all these golden temples and you have cardboards. And we, he was trained in Thailand before he started with me in Frankfurt. So to add cardboard on paintings was an obligatory thing in Thailand. So he knew how to do it, and we did the day after. We would go out and buy stuff, and we did something, and it came about, And of course, I can tell it in an easy way, but it was like this. And of course, we were considering, and I was very interested in these paradoxes of material.
Yeah.
And that was how it came about. And there's a lot of beautiful things, and we even went to this in Thailand and in many other places outside of the West. Things are done manually, and when you go and see how gold pounders are doing gold leaves manually, it has like this, I'm attracted to this brutally beautiful manual craft that such things are made of.
Yeah.
And of course, this is still like the notion that gold have like this value, but gold leaves actually doesn't. It's like really, there's nothing in it really. It's kind of hollow.
And as you know, because we walked through the show, we have one of Rauschenberg's cardboard pieces in the installation, and I love this kind of idea that it comes from a kind of necessity to go to that material because he had just moved to Captiva Island from New York and wanted to find something to work with, and cardboard was everywhere. But for him, it also had this very physical, bodily resonance. And, he talked about it being a material of waste and softness. And in some ways, when I look at these pieces, there is that, it's an object, these are materials, but there is this kind of bodily metaphor to it as well. Did you know those Rauschenberg works?
No, like when I started to do them, people talked about Jasper Johns, and I told them this is not right. It's Rauschenberg that he definitely made me aware of the quality of cardboards. But then in these, like references are a strange thing because, like I also love Katie Nolan. You test them out and then you see how far they survive.
Yeah. And it can be all of them.
Yeah.
This was the exhibition that you did that was, I feel like this is inside the artist studio or something. But it's part of the Hugo Boss Prize. And I kind of love this idea that instead of showing your own work, you show the work of Martin Wong, who we see here on your left. Fantastic artist who worked on the Lower East Side, in East Village, kind of the flaneur of the Lower East Side. And the painting on the right is one of, the fireman's trampoline.
Yeah.
He loved firemen. And so for this exhibition, you were working with his archive, right? That it was still with his mother Florence in San Francisco?
Yeah, like now it really gets. This is, the thing is that I got to know the mother of Martin Wong, and Martin Wong was living in the Lower East Side, but came from upper middle class parents in San Francisco, and he would send all things that would be more or less precious to the parents in San Francisco. And I came in to research. I got kind of addicted to the work of Martin Wong, so I visited. The mother she was 95 plus or something. She was also quite up there, and she didn't knew what to do with a lot of the things that he basically had archived in her home, including a lot of fantastic artworks and drawings from his childhood to ceramics and whatever. And I had tried to take curators from MoMA, from Walker, to show what I thought was a very precious thing.
Yeah.
And somebody had to protect it, I thought, because the mother was starting to talk about to make a garage sale or crazy stuff. And it would be, sad for me to see that happen. So that was why I was somehow showing certain curators around. And Dorian Chung, who worked at MoMA at the time, he's a good politician, good curator too, told me that that's not going to happen, Young, because at the time Martin Wong didn't have a reputation to actually that a bigger American institution would take care of it. He was the one that told me that I should make it into an artwork, and that probably would make it possible. And that was what we did. And can you stop with this one?
Yeah.
So you probably can't read it here, but this is one of the. One have to say that, of course, this is a relationship also very angled into with his parents. But I think that's what made it so beautiful, because one of the biggest quality of Martin Wong is the way that he were able to speak on multiple levels all at the same time. So in one hand, he was really in contact with handsome young. He was a bit older. He was 35.
Yeah.
But he collected all these works from very young graffiti guys, good looking, blah blah blah, and underground gay scene. Where he really could just operate on all these levels. And at the same time, his relationship with his parents, or his mother especially, was just exceptional. And what you see in this one in the middle with the Shivas, he would, he's famous for doing, a part of his production was painting these sign language paintings. And he would do that in this one, and I cannot read it here, but I think I remember, to a little lady that always have her hands full, but he draws like all the hands on it.
And where is this now?
And the walker.
So it worked.
So it worked.
So Jan had 2 exhibitions in Venice this past summer. He was representing Denmark at the Venice Biennale, and also had an exhibition at the Pinot Collection. So these are images from the Danish pavilion. And I think we can get back to talking about works from these sculptural works with the work in the exhibition, but just to give us a sense of what that looked like. And this is in Bolzano as well, in Italy?
Yeah. That's the production side.
And this was from Slip of the Tongue at the Palazzo Grassi, which was an exhibition that you curated with Caroline Bourgeois, and it was your work and work from other artists in the Pinot Collection, and artists that you invited or selected to include as well. So this is when you would walk into this building that Tadeo Ando had reimagined. And that's it, Jean-Luc Moulin. When you would walk in, to your right on the easel, but not facing us, was a Peter Hujar. And then on the wall was a David Hammonds. And then one of your works in the back. And this is a photograph of your father, right? Installing or drawing this piece on the ground. Break My Face In from song Fabulous Muscles by Shushu. Works by Peter Hujar that were included. And the work by Neri Bagramian that the exhibition got its title from. So I was wondering with this if you could, what's so interesting for me about much of your work and much of the practice is that there's this kind of collusion of selves and practices that work and manifest themselves in any particular artwork or in a project. But this was one where you had this kind of constellation of works and voices together. So what were the toughest challenges about doing an exhibition like this, where you were serving both as artist and as curator? And would you ever want to do something like this again?
It was just a fantastic experience. I think the framework of it, the freedom that was given, and the possibility of working with great artworks.
Yeah.
That's, to install a great artwork is pure pleasure.
Yeah.
And, it happens a lot, but I think it's very difficult to wrongly install such things. And I always believe that installing a work is also learning about the work. Of course you can, we talk about a lot of meaning within a work, but the physicality of it is just, there's something one has to know about too. Yeah. And that's the only way of learning that is actually to install them.
Yeah.
And I was privileged to be able to deal with so many great artworks.
And for works like the Hujar photographs that you included, I don't mean to have to ascribe for why certain people are included and why others were not. But in some ways, why was someone like, or why was Hujar, for instance, someone that you knew that you wanted in this exhibition?
I think after the exhibition, I became much more, I became much more obsessed with Peter Hujar's photos, and that had something to do with installing them. I learned a lot about it. I mean, this is not a good example of it, but in other rooms, I would, together with, we were a lot of people around. There was a lot of artists invited to come and install their show, but there were also like very good people to have around in order to have advices from and talks with, and it's there's not pictures of it, but I can say that in 2 rooms in the exhibitions, we already had installed like all the sculptures and what we wanted in the room, and we were going around with a photo of Peter Hujar, putting it around, and in 2 of the rooms, to add a photo of Peter Hujar just lifted up the whole space to another level. That's when you find out that works are great artworks. Yeah. And what I really learned, it wasn't, for me, I thought that there was never a division between mediums. I mean, if it was sculptures or if it was photographies. But what I learned about working with Peter Hujar's photos were really that, they could stand against gigantic sculptures and it would just make sense somehow. Yeah. And I think that's not something you can sit behind a desk and think of. I think you can see it when it's in front of you. And I think that was fantastic for me to learn, basically. Yeah.
So now I wanted to turn to the works that are in the Precarious, but start with this piece that's in our collection. And this is a work called 2/2/1861 from 2009, but continues to this day. And it's a letter from the French missionary Venard, writing to his father, I think a few weeks before he's to be executed. So I was wondering, and this is also a letter that your father reproduces and continues to reproduce until he dies. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about where you came across these original documents and the idea to have them kind of translated into this form.
When I had traveled in Vietnam before I found this letter, and it was a church actually where which I visited, and they had like these relics of Théophane Vénard, and I was researching a bit into it, and it turns out that his head was in this church in Vietnam, but the rest of the body was sent back to the seminary that trained him, and this is in 1860s. So, that's kind of an interesting thing. So when I was in residency in Paris, I thought I wanted to visit the place where the rest of the body was, and I found like this, amazing. It's really amazing place. It's the seminary that since 17th century or whatever was training priests to go abroad to do missionary works. And Vietnam was apparently one of the violent periods where a lot of the missionaries got killed, and Catholics, they like everything related to martyrs, and they have a lot of things there, and it's a really, I would recommend anybody to go there if they're in Paris. And I was researching a bit into the archives of these things and found this quite amazing letter from Théophane Vénard, because it's a kind of exceptional. Most missionaries, they would write letters to the Supreme, and Théophane Vénard wrote like a lot of letters to his real family, and And when I stumped into this, I was like, my father was created, was born to write this letter. And you know, so it's, you know, it was just a lot of things that matches.
Well, your father doesn't speak French though, right? So this
No.
act of translating the document is something that is a form of veneration, but
Yeah.
not really a transcription, really.
Yeah, but the thing is also, it's, you know, like, if I contributed anything to the arts, I think it's this work, because it has so many elements that I still today keep thinking of, even though he have produced 800 letters today. And, you know, Vietnamese is one of the language that was officially transcribed into Latin of the Asian countries. So anybody that writes and reads Vietnamese today, they write and read in Latin, but it's a phonetic transcription, and it's, you know, like, it's he, you know, like, we think of, when it tells us the story, we think of it as a colonial aspect, but it's not really only, you know, because the National Socialists would support such a thing, because hieroglyphs, sign languages signs would be mostly for the upper class. So when you look into language, it's phonetic language is actually always coming from the underclass, or the one that's not attached to the upper class or attached to knowledge. So when you look into Japanese language, you know, they have 3 sign language, and one of them is phonetic.
Yeah.
That was created by women, like, to have an internal communication of private histories. And, you know, traces of phonetic writing goes back to copper mines, where it was the workers that invented, like, things to communicate. And you know, this is, and then with the Latin that was transcribed phonetically into Vietnamese was not a colonial thing only. It was really supported by the National Socialists, because it would make the peasants be able to write and read. And, you know, what interests me is really, like, how language travels, and it mutates, and it returns, and it manifests again. And it's a project that somehow have its own life, because it, you know, my father is also just doing weird things with it, and that I really, I mean, of course I was initiating it, but it's also this weird thing between me as the author of it, my father as the producer, and there's no connection, you know, and then there's the viewer, and that it's uncontrollable. Like, in terms of understanding, interpretation. And I think that was if I did any accomplishment, it was with this, because that's really what I believe in. I don't believe that artworks are a tool for communication, because we all look and see depending on our information, our gender, our social classes, and that it's a field of negotiation that's not fixed and not controllable.
Yeah.
And I think what this project really evokes is this weird thing between producer, viewer, and anybody engaged in it.
Yeah. And this...
That was also from the archive. So this is all the, you know, this is Tufan Vinardis on the upper left corner, and this is the last picture taken of these new aspirants going to Southeast Asia.
And then I think we're running out of time, but I want to make sure we touch on these 2 pieces in the show. This, to remind people if they haven't seen the show, is an install photograph with one of Jan's work on the bottom right, and then on the left side with Richard Tuttle's piece from 1992 in the middle. Another shot. And this is a piece, and I'll try to read it. Idab et ni mirasiti, and I'm sure a number of people like me thought at one point that it must be some Vietnamese title. And then you point out that no, just read it backwards. And it reads, "It is warm in the body," which is a text from The Exorcist. And this is a piece where it's a found box for carnation milk with a piece of marble that has been carved down to fit inside. And these are some photographs that Jan has taken of the marble statue, 1st to 2nd century Roman, is that about right? Yeah.
Yes.
With this amazing photograph of the cuts about
the great machines.
Being placed into the box and then placed. So there's obviously a real violence happening in this work, but there's also historical violence that in some ways the work is referring to, how artifacts get taken and used and rethought. There's the idea of, for me, the priority that the box gets, that this humble thing becomes the thing that you look at first, and it has to be accommodated. And I wonder this might be too long for tonight, but when these works started to become something that you wanted to do.
No, I cannot answer that.
Okay. What is it like to be in that room when the cut is happening?
No, it's, it's, I think I learned this from school, when you learn about minimalist strategies, conceptual strategies, when you learn about ancient art history, it's all in this work actually. I always think of it as a kind of, you go to school and you have all this weird knowledge, and then when it's compressed, it turns out to be this thing. Yeah. And I think it's just products that I really like. I love carnation milk. Yeah. It's like this weird thing that's send it out to all countries that's not used to drink milk.
Yeah.
And it's like candy.
Yeah.
And then all these beautiful Roman sculptures, and it's a lot of information that just get compressed. And so, you showed a few pictures of the Danish pavilion. So it was all these samplings of histories. And what I was interested in is, for these works especially, was the building of different times. And, that you could drag things from, this is Roman to Renaissance sculptures to products of today, and you compress them. And I was searching for a long time to find something that was really up to date, and the idea was to have this somehow incorporated, and it just didn't work out, and that was how The Exorcist came up. So I thought you just could add in the title of it, then you would have the large compression of different time periods.
Yeah.
And when you choose these kind of things, whether it would be a material or it would be a title, I think it comes back to the notion of having either material or titles that have possible double meanings. Mm-hmm. That it's not, I'm never interested in things that points to a direction, but more things that makes the sculpture suspended in poles that it can tilt from one side to the other.
Yeah.
And what is great about The Exorcists, not only that you can suddenly say things that you usually are not allowed to do, but that it in one hand is demons, and the other hand it's also very Hollywood.
Yeah.
So it has like, it gives you a lot of doors to escape from.
Yeah. And then this is a piece, Fiat Veritas et Peritus Mundus, with the gold leaf of the Budweiser case of beer applied to the front. Then with that text done inside by your father as well. And the fairly flat-footed translation of this is, let there be truth, though the world may perish.
Yeah.
And the way that I know this text somewhat is the one that says, let there be justice, though the world may perish, in the Roman Empire phrase. So was this a found text, or was this a transition from you?
Yeah, it's Hannah Arendt that changed it a little bit.
Yeah. And so this is first made by your father, the language is placed and then sent to Thailand to have the.
No, I think it's reversed.
The other way around?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe we open up for questions.
Let's do it. Questions? I think this gentleman.
So what was your reaction, John, when you first saw the Pistoletto piece, the Vietnam piece that's hung right outside of the exhibition?
No, I've seen that reproduced a lot of times. What do you mean? Sorry.
The initial reaction is, because it's Eurocentric, is it positive?
No, I grew up with it. Not this piece, but like a certain version. Like a lot of artworks that deals with the war in a certain way. That's one way of perceiving the situation, which is it making echo? No. I think it's actually really interesting, because I think reversely, if we go into such discussion, the Vietnam War was a geopolitical creation. So everybody should have cultural response to it. And that's it.
There's often a discourse around your work about your Vietnamese heritage. But what about growing up in Denmark and the climate there?
Exactly. That's also always what I say. In Denmark, I got very bad grades in history, and I've worked professionally within the arts more than 10 years. If I'm professional in anything, it's really about art. Returning back to the project with my father's letter and the missionaries, I thought there was a very important body of work that I introduced, because I think when I was doing works related to specifically the Vietnam War, I didn't want it to, if one goes to the highlands of Vietnam today, you can understand what happened with the indigenous people that was supporting the Americans during the Vietnam War. They're of course the one that suffers mostly of the Hmong people of the Central Highlands. And I think if one deals with the subject matter of power, one has to deal with the continuously suppression of misuse of power. And that was one of the main reasons I turned back to the missionaries, where you see like all these Westerners being executed for doing something they really believed in. So it was to balance these things. I never dealt with the American-Vietnamese war in order to focus on that. I wanted I think it's much more about the misuse of power. And then you pick up certain things.
Any other questions?
Jan, throughout your work, we see you working with material from other people, working with your friends' photographs from Vietnam, with Peter Hujar's material, with Martin Wong's material. I'm wondering your relationship to these individuals and your thoughts about ideas of collaboration, or are they collaborators? I'm interested in your opinion of that relationship with the people that are in some ways helping you. Your father also.
That's a good question. I think they're very different collaborations. I think your relationship with your father, it's a complex one. But it's also, in my situation, it was also one that, I was always mother's child. I really never had like a close relationship with my father. But we actually got one through this working the relationship. And it's not something that you, I didn't have like a vision of where it would end. I think this project is actually much more a starting point and an observation of where it would go. And, when I met Joseph Correa in 2007, I didn't knew that I would still end up befriending him today. For the dead people, it's, I believe that you can do a collaboration with them, but it's on another level. And because it's, you go into a certain production and believe, it's the way that I look into certain artists' work that's not here today. I believe that this is the way that the artists are thinking, because that's how I see the artworks. I think the biggest problem with dead people is their states. They are always unpredictable and very emotional.
I think we have time for one last question. If not, have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jan.